Obinna stood at the edge of his village, staring down the winding road that led to the unknown. Behind him, the familiar sounds of Umuaka filled the air. Children's laughter, the rhythmic pounding of fufu, and the distant voices of traders haggling over prices. This was the only life he had ever known, yet it was not the life he wanted. His parents, Papa Ez and Mama Nkechi, had given everything to raise him. Poor farmers, they spent their days under the scorching sun, planting yams and cassava, only to harvest just enough to survive. Yet they never once complained. They taught him that a man's true wealth was his honor, not his possessions. But Obinna had bigger dreams, dreams that stretched beyond the farmlands. He had heard of Lagos, a place where men carved their destinies with their bare hands. If he was to change his fate, he had to go. His mother wiped her eyes with the edge of her wrapper. "My son, never forget where you come from." "I won't, Mama," Obinna whispered, swallowing the lump in his throat. As he took his first step away from Umuaka, he promised himself one thing. When he returned, it would not be as the same poor boy who had just left. Obinna's heart was heavy as he stood at the village square, a small bag slung over his shoulder. His parents had walked with him to the road, their faces lined with worry. His mother pressed a small piece of cloth into his hand. "No matter how far you go, remember home." His father placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "A man's wealth is not in his pockets, but in his heart." Obinna nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Then, without looking back, he left. The city was nothing like the village. He faced hunger, rejection, and days where he barely survived. His first job was as a shop assistant, earning just enough for one meal a day, but he worked hard, learned fast, and took risks. One day, he overheard two wealthy traders discussing an opportunity. Bravely, he spoke up, offering a solution to their problem. They gave him a chance. That chance led to another. Within years, he was no longer the struggling village boy, he was a successful businessman. As his wealth grew, he did something unexpected. He brought his parents to the city without telling anyone. When they arrived, they expected to see their son struggling, but instead, he led them into a grand home. His mother touched the walls, trembling. This is yours," she whispered. Obinna smiled. "No, this is ours." Tears rolled down her face. Her son had made it. But as time passed, his mother grew restless. "Obinna, you have all this wealth, but no wife. When will you marry?" He always gave the same answer. "I will marry when I find the right woman." "What kind of woman are you looking for?" Obinna sighed. "A woman who will love me for me, not for my riches." His mother shook her head, but he had already made up his mind. If he was going to find true love, he had to go back to where he came from. He had to return to the village. The road back to Umuaka was long and dusty, winding through thick forests and quiet farmlands. Obinna sat in an old, rusty bus, his face hidden beneath a tattered cap. The other passengers barely looked at him. Just another poor traveller heading to the village. But beneath the rags and worn-out slippers was a man who had built a fortune. He had told no one except his parents that he was coming back. Not his childhood friends, not even the elders who once praised him for his intelligence. He needed to see the village with fresh eyes. More importantly, he needed to know if true love still existed in a place where poverty had shaped people's desires. As the bus pulled into the village square, familiar sights greeted him. The same old market women, the same dusty paths, the same houses made of mud and zinc roofs. But no one recognized him. His once clean-shaven face was now rough with an unkempt beard, his fine clothes replaced with rags barely holding together. He had even walked barefoot to complete the disguise. He moved through the village like a shadow, watching. People walked past him without a second glance. The boys he once played with now treated him like a nobody. Some of the young women he had admired as a teenager now turned their noses up at him. One afternoon, he approached a group of women selling vegetables. He greeted them politely, but they barely responded. "Please, I haven't eaten since morning. Can you spare something for me?" he asked. One of them scoffed. "If you don't have money, keep moving. We're not running a charity here." Obinna smiled to himself. The test had begun. As he walked away, hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he didn't care. He wasn't searching for food. He was searching for a wife. Obinna spent days moving through the village, testing the hearts of the women he once admired. He watched, listened, and approached them in different ways, searching for even a hint of kindness. But time and time again, he was met with disappointment. One afternoon, he saw Chioma, the daughter of a wealthy palm wine tapper. As a boy, he had secretly liked her. She was beautiful, always well dressed, and carried herself with confidence. He approached her where she stood with her friends. "Good afternoon, Chioma," he said, bowing slightly. She barely looked at him. "Who are you?" "I am just a traveller," he said, keeping his voice low. "I was wondering if you could help me with a little food. I have nothing to eat." Chioma wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Do I look like your mother?" Her friends laughed, and Obinna nodded. Another failed test. Another day he approached Ifunanya, the daughter of the village chief. She was known for her generosity, and he wanted to believe she was different. He pretended to be injured, limping slightly as he approached her compound. "Please, my sister, I hurt my leg on the road. Could I have some water?" he asked. She eyed him suspiciously. "We don't give beggars water here." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Night after night, Obinna sat under a mango tree, thinking. Was there no woman in Umuaka who still had a pure heart? On the seventh day, as he wandered near the village stream, he saw a young woman washing clothes. She hummed softly, her voice calm and sweet. Something about her felt different. He stepped forward and greeted her. "Good evening." She looked up, smiled gently and replied, "Good evening, brother. Do you need help with something?" Obinna studied her carefully. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally found someone worth testing. Obinna had seen enough. The village had changed, or perhaps people had always been this way. He had wealth beyond what anyone could imagine, yet no woman had shown him kindness when he appeared as a poor man. But the girl by the stream intrigued him. There was something different about her. He needed to be sure, so he took his disguise even further. Through an old friend, he found work as a gateman at the home of a wealthy cocoa merchant, Chief Okafor. The position was perfect. He could observe people without them knowing who he really was. The first days were humiliating. People barely looked at him, let alone spoke to him with respect. Some even threw insults his way. "Gateman! Open the gate quickly!" one man shouted, not even bothering to make eye contact. Village boys, the same ones he had once played with, passed by laughing. "Look at this one, he left for the city and returned to open gates." But Obinna endured it all, watching and waiting. Then, one afternoon, as he swept the front yard, he saw her again, the girl from the stream. She walked past the gate, carrying a basket of vegetables. This time, he stopped her. "Good afternoon, sister," he said humbly. She turned and smiled. "Good afternoon, sir. I remember you." "You do?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes, you were by the stream the other day." She glanced at his broom. "Are you working here?" Obinna nodded. "Yes, I am just a gateman." She smiled again without a trace of mockery. "There is nothing wrong with that. Work is work." That single sentence made his heart stop. She saw dignity in labour, something none of the others had. Obinna watched as she walked away, something stirring inside him. Perhaps he had found what he was looking for, but she still had to be tested. Obinna had finally learned her name, Ada. She was the daughter of a poor widow who sold vegetables in the market. Unlike the other women he had tested, she never looked down on him, but kindness alone was not enough. He needed to be sure. For the next few weeks, he watched her closely. She passed by the house almost every evening, always carrying something for her mother. Each time, she greeted him warmly, never treating him as just a gateman. One afternoon, he decided to test her. As she walked past the gate, he sighed loudly and clutched his stomach. Ada stopped. "Are you all right?" "I haven't eaten all day," he muttered, lowering his head. She frowned and opened her small basket. Inside was a single piece of roasted yam, the only food she had for herself. For a moment she hesitated. Her own hunger gnawed at her, and she knew her mother hadn't eaten much either. But then she took a deep breath and held out the food. "Here," she said, forcing a smile. "It's not much, but you can have it." Obinna looked at the food, then at her. She gave, even when she had almost nothing. Days later he tested her again. This time he carried a heavy sack and pretended to struggle with it. "Ada, please, can you help me?" She set her basket down immediately and helped him lift it. "You shouldn't carry this alone," she said. "Hard work is good, but you must also take care of yourself." Obinna swallowed hard. She had no idea she was lifting more than just a sack. She was lifting his faith in love. Then came the final test. One evening, a group of young men stood near the gate, laughing at him. "Gateman, go and open the gate for your destiny," one mocked. Obinna remained silent, but his heart pounded. Would Ada ignore him like the others? She turned sharply to the men. "And what are you doing with your lives?" "A real man works hard, no matter where he starts." The laughter stopped. Obinna exhaled. She was the one! It was time to end the disguise. The next morning, Obinna stood before a small mirror staring at his reflection. The test was over. It was time to reclaim his true identity. From under his bed, he pulled out a fine leather bag and opened it. Inside were the clothes of the man he had hidden for months. Neatly pressed trousers, a crisp white shirt, and polished shoes. He shaved his beard, combed his hair, and stepped out of the gatehouse as a new man. Or rather, as the man he had always been. The transformation shook the village. People gasped. Women who once ignored him now whispered excitedly. The same men who mocked him as a gateman now bowed their heads in shame. But Obinna ignored them. He had only one destination: Ada's house. When he arrived, Ada's mother looked startled but welcomed him politely. Why was a wealthy man here? Then Ada stepped out. The moment she saw him, she froze. Her eyes widened as she took in his fine clothes, his polished shoes, the quiet confidence in his stance. She took a step back. You're not a gateman?" Obinna held her gaze. "No, my name is Obinna, and I have come to ask for your hand in marriage." Ada's breath caught. Had she been deceived? Had he only been playing with her heart? Obinna held his breath. Would she accept the truth or walk away? The night after the revelation, Obinna visited Ada's house again, this time as himself. He knelt before her mother and said, "I love your daughter. She is the kindest, most selfless woman I have ever met. I wish to make her my wife." Ada's mother wiped her eyes. "You have my blessing, my son." Then she turned to Ada. "My daughter, this is your choice to make." Ada, still overwhelmed, looked at Obinna. "You deceived me, but not to mock me. You wanted to find someone who loved you for who you are, not for what you have." She exhaled. "And I do." Obinna smiled. "Then marry me," she nodded. "Yes." The wedding day arrived, grand and unforgettable. His parents, whom he had secretly informed, arrived from the city, their hearts swelling with pride. Chiefs and elders blessed the union. But before the ceremony, an old flame from the village, a woman who once rejected him, rushed forward, begging for another chance. "Obinna, I didn't know! If I had!" He raised a hand, silencing her. "You knew my heart, yet you chose wealth, but she," he turned to Ada, "chose kindness." The real surprise came after. Obinna bought a house for Ada's mother, ensuring she never had to struggle again. Then he took Ada's hand. "Let's go home." Before leaving, he led her to the old gatehouse. "This is where I tested the world," he said. "This is where I found you." Then he handed the gatekeeper's key to a young, struggling man, offering him a job. "Start here, but never stop dreaming." As he and Ada rode toward the city, she whispered, "I would have married you even if you were still a gateman." Obinna smiled. "And that is why I chose you." The village watched as they disappeared into the horizon, a love tested by disguise, proven by truth, and rewarded by fate.